Hi, we're Josh
and Ariel Wamsley,
owners of Green Valley Tree LLC, based in North Windham.
We're proud to sponsor Connecticut East This Week and to serve the communities of Windham and New London counties with our tree removal and plant healthcare services.
Visit our website at greenvalleytreeworks.com for a full list of our services or give us a call on 860-234-4041. We look forward to hearing from you.
Acquired Savant Syndrome, a condition that presents extraordinary skills after someone suffers a traumatic brain injury or illness. We talk to David Marchi about his incredible art ability that emerged after a serious accident. Plus, we take a look at other stories making the headlines from around the region.
This is Connecticut East This Week.
Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. Savant syndrome is a rare condition in which someone who is generally born with significant mental disabilities and demonstrates certain abilities far in excess of the average person generally is related to memory. The condition was brilliantly brought to life in the 1988 Oscar award-winning film Rain Man, starring Dustin Hoffman, who played a character who was an autistic savant with amazing memory skills. But you don't have to be born with savant syndrome. You can acquire a version of it, and it can take many different forms, as I found out when I visited local artist David Marchi at his New London art studio.
So we're talking to David Marchi. Welcome to Connecticut East This Week, David.
Thank you, Brian.
So a fascinating story that we're going to get into over the next 20 or so minutes about something called Acquired Savant Syndrome. Before we get there, we just want to do a little bit of sort of like, who is David Marchi? So before this life-changing event happened, what were you doing as a job?
Prior to the accident, I was working on a game-changing project with two partners for almost 10 years. We were developing a consumer tourist ride for Times Square. It involved me working with some really great world-class ride designers, engineers. We were testing rides. It was quite an intense project and very physical for me. And unfortunately, the project ended after my accident because I just wasn't capable of filling the role anymore.
So an incredibly busy man, a creative person as well. I mean, it is the creative industry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then a life-changing event happened. You had an accident. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so while I was in Florida, my friends rented a boat, and we went out into the Gulf. And it was very rough that day. There were a lot of boats out there. And for some reason, my friend decided to turn the boat into all these wakes and kind of hot dog over them. And I was on the front of the boat, and I was holding on. And he hit a wake, and I was thrown in the air, and I came back down as the boat was going up again and broke my back and injured both of my wrists, and I was kind of out until I woke up, and the next thing I knew, I was in the hospital, and trying to figure out what had happened, and so it was the beginning of a pretty incredible journey.
A very severe injury, a lot of recovery needed. So over time, you get over the injury, and then something else peculiar occurred.
Yeah.
This thing called Acquired Savant Syndrome. Now, tell us, your recollection and how you suddenly realized that this had manifested itself.
I think it was 2 weeks after the accident, and I was lying in bed, and my dreams progressively started getting very vivid in color, and I remember hands just dragging paint around, and every night, once again, more intense, but this was happening every single night. One night, I woke up and I just said, I need to get paints and I need to get a canvas and figure out what's going on. I have this really strong urge to paint. The next day, I was sitting in front of a small canvas and some paints, and I picked up the brush, and that was the beginning of my journey on where I am today as an artist.
And just so that we can make this clear for the people that are listening, before this happened, this accident happened, you had no you said you had no real artistic tendencies. You could do like stick figures and they weren't particularly good. And then suddenly this wild world of art just appears within you.
Yeah, it's to this day, and that was 2015 when I had the accident, but to this day, every time I create a piece of art, I'm still in amazement, and no matter how far I've gone, I've traveled around the world, I just can't believe that this is coming out of me. And I think for the longest time when I first started painting, I couldn't figure out how this happened. And it was a struggle for me because I couldn't call myself an artist because I didn't go to the traditional training, going to art school. And even an outside artist, there's no definition for this. So it was a pretty big struggle for me. While this incredible thing came out, I was still, it was juxtaposed with what is it? What is it called? And, are there other people out there like me?
So how did you go about, delving into it more? Because clearly you were inquisitive as to where this gift had suddenly come from. Mm-hmm. So just talk us through, what the journey was then to find out, well, what is this?
Sure. I mean, I really did a lot of research, and I was looking into post-traumatic stress disorder and another thing called post-traumatic growth, and some of that seemed to align with my symptoms, but it still wasn't it. I've heard just in the past that there are these people that had traumatic injuries, whether it was cranial or spinal injuries, and they wake up from the trauma and they could play the piano, or they can speak another language, or they can memorize encyclopedias, but that really didn't bring this to the forefront. Actually, it was an attorney, my intellectual attorney, Matt Wagner, who called me up one day in his car, and he said, you have to turn on one of the news stations because they're having a segment on something that I think happened to you. I went and turned the TV on, and I was watching it, and I said, wow, this is it. I think this is what happened to me. So I jotted the doctor's name down. It was Dr. Daryl Treffert. Got in touch with him, sent him an email, and told him what had happened to me. And it was interesting because his admin said he's very busy. He was actually in his 80s, and he's a pioneer of autism and these types of skills, especially with the Acquired Savant Syndrome. And she said, he's really busy. Don't expect a response soon, but he will respond to you. In 24 hours, he had sent me a 2-page email and was very interested in collecting more data because he keeps the database of all the acquired savants around the world. And that was the moment that I said, he confirmed it, and he said, you definitely fall into this. And we started a relationship where he put me in the register, which are about 300 people around the world that are registered now with this. And, and until he passed this past year, had a pretty close relationship, especially because mine was more of a spinal trauma, and usually most of it's cranial. So he started studying the spinal trauma with the syndrome.
And you say you're in a sort of a pretty rare group. I mean, you say there's 300 registered. I mean, clearly there could be undiagnosed people out there, but,
sure.
Just 300 in the world that are registered.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's incredible as well.
Yeah, it's I look at that and I say, well, I'm part of this. Am I part of this? But it's not even the number that is there for me. It's like you said, it's how many more people are there out there that don't know what it is and aren't really diagnosed, didn't have the luxury, for example, of having someone call up and say, you got to watch this program. So a lot of the things I do right now, and mission is like healing through my art, but also hoping to reach out through my social media to find people who might have similar situations so I can help lead them. And it's happened significantly through my Instagram. It's amazing how many people have reached out to me from all around the world about similar symptoms.
Can you give us any examples that maybe, really struck you when they did contact you at all?
I think the most incredible thing is how personal these people are. I don't know them, and it's not just a 2-sentence thing, I think I have it, but they go into the entire story, and some of it's heart-wrenching of accidents where, everyone in the car was killed except them, and they suffered, a cranial trauma and were in a coma for 4 months and came out of it, and they became an artist. What I started doing was leading them to Dr. Treffert's group, because I used to answer all of these, and it just got overwhelming. I'm an artist, and I wanted to make sure that there was a place for them to go. And so I spoke to him and worked something out where they were going to start taking calls and emails from these people and hopefully kind of putting them in a place where they would be comfortable and, once again, finally relieved that they can figure out and tell their friends, like, this is what happened to me.
What did people around you, friends and family, what did they think when, this David that they knew suddenly was creating this incredible art, and we're going to be talking about that in a little while, and then when you had found out what it was that had brought this about in you, what was their reaction?
I think it's interesting that you asked that question because I'm trying to think back. It was disbelief. They had this similar reaction that I had, like, where did this come from? My parents are very creative. I'm creative, but to be able to pick up a brush and paint and create things that are way outside of what my comfort level would ever be was amazing, but also very hard to explain. And sometimes people didn't believe it. They were, questioning, like, okay, so, you used to paint, and I'm like, no, I didn't paint. And I think finding Dr. Treffert helped me justify this somewhat. So when I was approached by the press or even, friends or people, I now can lead them to an expert that can explain it. I don't need to explain it anymore. But it was, I remember my first gallery show, my ex-wife and my kids came, and it's the first time they ever saw my work. And, they were like in shock in a sense. They were like, oh my God, I've never this is beautiful. And so I think the reaction that I got from my family and my friends was the same reaction I had. So, we had that bond and we had that confusion, but, gradually, they just waited for the next picture to come out.
As you delved into, obviously, the research and found out what this was, the acquired savant syndrome, is there any, what do we know about why it brings out this creative side in people?
I think from a medical perspective, people should really Google or go to Dr. Treffert's site because he gives a really good explanation from a medical perspective of what happens. But, it's called sudden genius. There is something in all of us that a traumatic experience, once again, either spinal or cranial, just triggers this thing that's in our brain and how we're wired. Until his really in-depth studies, and he was also a consultant on Rain Man, so he really knows the spectrum of autism and art skills, but also this led him into, there's this other group that it's not based on birth, if you will, but it's based on an accident. The psychology magazines and everyone else that's jumped in to study this has really validated this as a medical condition that is, has a basis.
And other than the arts, do you feel different in any other way, or is life really the same? Except you have this now incredible gift of art and these, as I say, these pictures, which we're going to talk about in a moment.
I think the fact that this happened to me, it consumed me. I was painting at times 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, I've painted over 200 paintings since the end of 2015, and I became obsessed with it. And it wasn't an unhealthy obsession. It was, I go to bed and dream at night, and I usually dream my paintings, and the next day I get up and I line the paints up and start. I dream every night. And when I'm in the middle of a painting, I usually dream about finishing it. How am I going to finish? So it completely has consumed me, but, it's great. I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, I just love what I do. I've met some incredible people and artists, and it's just opened up this whole new world that, at my age right now, it's unbelievable that I have this start in life.
Are those dreams just as vivid now, 5 years on, post-accident, do you think? I mean, as I say, we're going to be talking about these beautiful pictures in a moment.
I think they're actually more vivid because now there's construction and structure to it, where prior it was just hands moving around. And, the really cool thing about the hand thing is, until I really got into the art world and my initial paintings looked similar to Gerhard Richter, the German artist, and I didn't know who he was until a designer friend of mine came over and said, well, you paint in that style. And I looked him up, and I'm like, wow, it's kind of interesting. And as I was going through his work, I noticed a series he had called Hands. And the hands that were in my dream, I believe, were the same hands of his series that he did, because the colors behind his hands are the colors I saw. So without getting too heavy on that, I felt like I had somewhat of a kindred spirit there somewhere. But yeah, I think the dreams I have right now complete the painting, which is different than it was prior.
So let's talk about some of these beautiful pieces of art which are hanging around us, because we're actually in your studio here, and I think you probably won't mind me mentioning it's in downtown New London, which is a very creative city as well.
Yeah.
So there's one immediately behind you. I mean, beautiful colours. Just talk us through a little bit about that one, David. I mean, what's the style of that one, and what's your style now?
So my style has evolved significantly, and I look back at my first gallery show in New York, and the gallery gave me the entire first floor, and there were 150 people at the opening, and paintings sold before I even got there. And I look at the work today, and I'm like, ooh, some of it is okay, but like a lot of it was like, wow, it's not. Boy, have I evolved, So I think the evolution of my work is really based on a few things. It's meeting our other artists. It's also attending the Art Students League in New York, where I go to several classes there. I also committed myself to residencies around the world. A lot of it was healing residencies, and through that you learn different technique. I learned that it's okay to study, another artist's work, and if there's something that inspires you, you get inspired by it. Right now, I'm really, really intrigued by this art process called Gutai, Gutai, and it was really started by Japanese artists, and it was more or less a revolutionary of art. And essentially, it's your whole body into creating the painting, and it is not necessarily using brushes, because I rarely use paintbrushes, but I actually was doing it all along, and one of my instructors at the Art Student League said, you're using this Gutai technique. And once again, I had no idea what it was. And when I researched it, I'm like, wow. Another awakening for me was I was actually doing this. And so the painting that you're looking at behind me right now, which there's a progressive Instagram thing going on right now, is created in the Gutai fashion, where I actually took all of the spoons over the past year that I used to mix my paint and created a mobile with it. And then I put a canvas under it, and I started dripping the paint from the top, and it would gradually drip onto all the spoons, and I would manipulate the canvas under it, and created a piece of art. And so once again, it's using materials, not necessarily knowing where the art piece is going to go, but it's it's a fluid way to paint.
So it's very contemporary art, clearly.
Yeah, extremely.
It's not ships and animals and things like that. I mean, it's just
no.
beautiful. I mean, it's colour, it's explosions. I mean, the one I'm looking at is just incredible. Do they have stories behind them? I mean, other than the one you've just explained. I mean, this one, is to do with the spoons and the paint. Mm-hmm. Because often when artists do something, they can see the vision of it. Right. And often they explain that to people because it's their vision. It's a very personal thing. Is there a story maybe behind that one that we've just been talking about? Or?
I don't know if there is the story, because honestly, I haven't had enough time to look at it, to understand once again, how that was created. I know I was manipulating it. I know that I selected the colors. I know that, I hit the spoons and I can move them a certain way. But I think, to your point, if I study it enough, I'll figure out why I did that. Why did I move it? Why did I put orange on there? Why did I put this type of medium to come down on it? Because eventually, it all comes together.
Yeah, because I was going to say, because you've been mentioning throughout this interview, your art comes from your dreams, and dreams mean something. So it'll be fascinating at some point, as you say, when you have time, if
absolutely.
anything does come to you about, why. And you said, of course, as well, you've had, your paintings have been in galleries, you've sold a lot of paintings. I mean, was that also a surprise to you as well? I mean, they are incredible. I mean, I'm not just saying that because we're interviewing you. They are incredible pieces of art. And to think that, you've only been doing this for about 6 years, again, is staggering. So did it surprise you as well that how quickly people went, yeah, I want some of that?
Yeah. I mean, from the first gallery show I had, as I mentioned, 2 pieces sold before I even got there. Yeah, and I was amazed. First you have this realization of this gift, and then, for me, I wasn't going to do anything with it except paint for myself, and I had no intention of going to galleries or, selling work. And so when that next kind of level happened, it was crazy for me. But I made a commitment not to focus on selling my work, because my mission still was to help people identify. Also, because art has helped me significantly with my chronic pain that I still have, I wanted to make sure people got that message through my work and not necessarily buy the work. That was kind of a product of all of this. And, but I've donated a lot of my work. I mean, I donate to the Human Rights Campaign. I've donated pieces to Lady Gaga's Born This Way Foundation. And, all of this is to, once again, give something to these foundations or organizations that they can auction, but it always has a story behind it. It always has why I'm doing this. And once again, a lot of the organizations I select, are based on mental illness or some type of incident or human rights or something that are really important to me.
And I think, again, that's a really important point to make, because we still, sadly, in this world that we live in, look at mental illness as such a taboo subject. And, of course, it comes in so many different colours and variations. And we do need to continue the conversation. So being able to talk about this with you is, one, incredible, and the fact that you are continuing to donate work and keep that conversation going as well, so that people can understand it.
Yeah, I suffer from mental illness also, and unfortunately it's hereditary, so it's passed on to some of my children, and I can go back in my family and identify finally that that's what it was. But I'm not afraid to talk about it anymore, and as a matter of fact, I like to talk about it so people could see that it's okay, it's not taboo, and they could look at me as a real person as we're sitting down together and understand that, there are ways to manage it. You just have to be open and willing to figure out what those ways are, which is the most difficult thing for a lot of people.
Final question I want to put to you, and I don't want this to sound like a bit of a negative at the end of the interview. Do you ever concern yourself or have a concern that maybe the talent could disappear as quickly as it came? It's
funny that you mention that, because I am so afraid that could happen. And it's really strange, because it's almost like, you get it like that, and then it can go away like that. And so sometimes I'm almost like overly cautious of what I'm doing, because, with COVID, I got COVID, unfortunately, and I thought one of the things that might happen with me is I'll lose not my sense of smell and taste, but my artistic ability. So there's always that in the back of my mind, but I kind of put it aside and just go forward.
Well, David Marchi, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and also being here in your studio and seeing the creative process and this stunning artwork. And we hope that your gift stays with you for many, many years to come. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And you can find out more about David and his extraordinary artwork by visiting his website at gallerymarchi.com. That's GALLERYMARCHI.com.
Spring and summer are prime time for ticks that can spread Lyme disease and other infections. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention would like to remind you to wear bug repellent when outdoors, shower as soon as possible after coming indoors, and check your whole body for ticks every day. If you've been bitten by a tick and developed fever, rash, or fatigue, seek medical care. To learn more, visit www.cdc.gov/Lyme.
Got stumps? Then call Green Valley Tree LLC and let us remove them for you. Our stump grinder is quick and efficient, leaving your property stump-free in no time. Our stump grinding services are available for homeowners, contractors, and municipalities alike. Call us for a quote at 860-234-4041. And find out about our other services at our website, greenvalleytreeworks.com. We're family owned and fully licensed.
Time now for a look at some of the other stories making the headlines in the region recently. A new report shows Connecticut has been able to decrease the number of young people in its juvenile justice system since increasing the age of criminal responsibility to 18. Michaela Savitt has more.
In 2007, Connecticut was the first state to make this change, in a reform package that was completely implemented by 2012. From 2000 to 2011, the state saw 60% fewer minors in residential care. Marcy Mistret authored the report for the Sentencing Project and notes the trend has led to less need overall for youth detention facilities.
States that raised the age overall did not need to build new facilities, and even those that initially built extra were able to close them down after a couple of years.
Connecticut was able to close a youth detention center and a juvenile training school without having to build more facilities. The report also recommends states address racial disparities in the criminal justice system, such as Connecticut's practice of narrowing the path to transfer young people to adult court. I'm Michaela Savitt, reporting.
The House and Senate voted last Wednesday to extend for another 2 months emergency declarations, giving Governor Lamont the authority to continue almost a dozen executive orders on COVID-19 policy. Lamont has been operating with increased authority since March of 2020. Last week, he requested the legislature meet to continue that authority in order to keep 11 executive orders in place beyond their scheduled deadline on July 20th. Both chambers approved the extension until September 30th, although the resolutions were passed by Democrats. A significant number joined all Republicans to vote against him. The House passed the resolution 73 to 56 with 9 Democrats in opposition. The Senate voted 19 to 15 with no votes from 4 Democrats, including Senators Saud Anwar of South Windsor, Dennis Bradley and Marilyn Moore of Bridgeport, and Kathy Austin of Sprague. Colleges of Distinction has recognized Eastern Connecticut State University for a variety of distinctions in its 2021-22 rankings, including badges of distinction for public colleges, Connecticut colleges, business and education programs, career development, equity and inclusion, and military support. Colleges of Distinction is a guide for college-bound students that recognizes undergraduate institutions that offer a well-rounded and individualized education. In the day this week, at least $4,000 in damage was done to the water slide at Ocean Beach Park in New London recently, causing the attraction to close. The vandalism occurred while the park was closed, and the damage was discovered by workers. A pipe that feeds water into the slide was broken, causing extensive flooding and mud to pour into the area. Fencing that surrounds the slide also was damaged, and 2 signs were stolen, according to Jeff Mullen, who owns and operates the slide, rides and arcade at the park. In the Norwich Bulletin this week, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Norwich has filed for bankruptcy reorganisation to resolve several pending lawsuits initiated by individuals who allege they were sexually assaulted by at least 2 overseers of a former Deep River boarding school during the 1990s. In a letter posted on the diocese website, the Most Reverend Michael Coate, Bishop of Norwich, said the Chapter 11 filing through the U.S. Bankruptcy Court in Hartford was the most equitable way to deal with the dozens of lawsuits filed alleging abuse at the academy at Mount St. John. In the Middletown Press this week, East Haddam voters rejected a proposed budget by an overwhelming margin last month. Town leaders trimmed more than $580,000 from the spending plan in preparation for another referendum. The new $36.3 million budget includes no proposed tax increases and instead relies on federal pandemic assistance to cover some of its proposed 5.6% spending increase. The failed budget presented to voters in June included a less than 1% increase in the mill rate, along with a 7.2% increase in spending. Voters rejected that budget by a 4-1 margin. And in the Chronicle this week, former University of Connecticut standout Katie Lou Samuelson's dream of making history at the Summer Olympics have come to a halt. The Seattle Storm forward, who was placed in COVID-19 health and safety protocols recently, was officially scratched from the Team USA's first ever 3x3 women's basketball team and will not compete in Tokyo. In an Instagram post, Samuelson said she was heartbroken about testing positive for the coronavirus, particularly because she is part of the 99% of WNBA players who are fully vaccinated. That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East, and on Instagram at Connecticut East This Week, where you can also listen to the show again on demand. And please like, follow and share on your social media platforms too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.